Alright guys, Wes here, welcome back to the channel. So as you know, Dragon's Dogma 2 is upon us. We are about a month away from the official release date for the game, and Capcom has been drip feeding us with new information and details about this upcoming massive fantasy RPG. I firmly believe that this could be a true Game of the Year contender for 2024, and in today's video, we are going to talk about all of the new information that's been released about Dragon's Dogma 2, including new Vocation gameplay, an update regarding the frame rate situation, a playable Dragon's Dogma 2 demo, and so much more. We have a lot to talk about in this video, so check the chapters for easy viewing, and without further delay, let's get into it. Now, as we get closer to the launch, Capcom has been dropping new information regarding each vocation, which are Dragon's Dogma 2's version of character classes. Now, there's set to be a ton of vocations in this game. The recent one that we just got confirmed was called Warfare, which happens to be exclusive to the Arisen, so it can't be used as a pawn, and it will actually be able to use every weapon and learn different skills from all of the other vocations. However, they do have lower base stats than the other vocations, meaning you'll have to be extra aware of your surroundings and situations in order to use other weapons and abilities effectively. So there's a lot of risk and reward when using this vocation. Now, along with that, we got a ton of short gameplay videos that showcase in-depth combat for each of these starting vocations. The others have to be unlocked via gameplay. Now, the first starting vocation is called the Fighter, which features similar combat to early Dark Souls games. So you'll have a sword, a shield, and then the combat loop is really just about stringing the slashes together, dodge rolling around the arena, and using your shield to parry enemy attacks and quickly take them down while they're staggered. Now, the second starting vocation is the Thief, which, if you can see from the video, is all about zipping in and out of harm's way and using dual-wielded daggers and one-handed blades to quickly slash up enemies. They use quick dashes to take enemies by surprise and get some damage in before rushing out before they can be countered, but they likely won't be able to sustain much damage if they don't get out of the way fast enough. There was also an interesting clip in the new gameplay footage that showed the Thief literally riding on the back of a larger enemy and stabbing them in the back over and over again as if it were a pilot taking down a Titan in Titanfall, which looked awesome as always. This is the type of gameplay that we were going to get for Dragon's Dogma 2. Now, along with that, they are also seemingly able to set their daggers on fire for extra damage, and apparently you could also stab larger enemies with explosives, allowing you to grab a hold of them, stick a piece of dynamite in them, and then just zip out of harm's way, and then eventually detonate the explosive. There is a ton of awesome potential with this class, and I cannot wait to try it out. Now, the third starting vocation is the Archer, which is pretty straightforward. The mobility is excellent, and they'll be able to use a jump and slide around the arena while simultaneously using the bow and arrow to provide damage from afar. They'll also be able to use melee attacks to get enemies away from them, but they won't do damage, so you'll have to stay away from enemies if you want to be helpful to your squad. Now, from the new gameplay, we know that there's a ton of different arrow types, such as explosive arrows that blow up on impact, guided arrows that can jump from target to target, and even flaming arrows that set your targets on fire. And I'm sure that there's going to be a ton of others. Now, along with those, there's also a heavy charged arrow that you can use to deal insane damage, but you'll have to spend a few seconds drawing the bow and taking aim, during which time you can get messed up if you're not aware of your surroundings. So between the amazing mobility, the abundance of arrow types, if you're feeling like playing Hawkeye or the Green Arrow, then the Archer vocation might be a solid starting point. Now, for the fourth and final starting point is the Mage, which is a good sorcery vocation. You can use projectile magic to pick away at enemies from a safe distance. You'll also be able to use spells to support your pawns, providing with healing and buffs. There's also extremely powerful offensive spells that take a long time to cast but deal insane damage. You could turn your hand into a flamethrower, summon lightning storms, and even blast the earth itself up and around enemies to instantly end them. But again, those powerful offensive spells take a while to actually cast, so you'll kind of have to pick and choose and just really find a good balance between support and damage whenever you're playing as the Mage. Now, while the gameplay of Dragon's Dogma 2 has been getting pretty universally hyped, there have been some concerns raised just how optimized this experience is going to be. Over the last few weeks, it's been reported by several outlets that the console version of Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to quote-unquote target 30 FPS without a performance mode option, which caused the entire community to just go crazy saying that the game is going to be unoptimized, it's only 30 FPS, and what happened to Dragon's Dogma 2? Like, this game is going to be bad. The 30 FPS cap information spread like wildfire, mainly because of the Steam page, where if you scroll down to the minimum and recommended specs, it says that the PC version will target 30 FPS, which seems extremely odd for a game running on Capcom's RE engine. This has led to a firestorm over whether or not the game will be optimized properly. While Capcom hasn't offered a lengthy statement on Twitter, we did recently get confirmation that Dragon's Dogma 2 will launch on PC with an uncapped frame rate. Now, when I first saw this news on Twitter, I told myself, like, of course the game is going to be over 30 FPS. It is 2024. Games on PC are just not releasing with a capped frame rate at 30 FPS. Now, while this is some really good good news, it could be a bit bad, mainly because of how they decided to spec this game out at. While it's easy to read uncapped frame rate as being 30 plus or maybe 60 plus, that's not necessarily true. If the frame rate is uncapped, that simply means that there's no hard cap on it. It does not mean that it's going to be getting above 30 FPS or above 60 or anything like that. The game could very well be running at 20 to 30 frames per second, but just because there's not a 30 FPS cap, they can still call it an uncapped frame rate. Now, we did not get any specific information on whether or not they were talking about uncapped frame rate on the PC or the console version, which kind of just throws up even more question marks into the mix. But with how much bad press that there's been regarding the game's optimization and the 30 FPS mumbo jumbo that literally every news outlet spread based on a minimum and recommended spec page is just kind of nonsense. Now, I don't think it's surprising that a developer would come out and confirm an uncapped frame rate, but I also do find it a bit strange how they would give such a vague explanation because, like I said, that doesn't actually tell us anything about how well or how poorly the game was going to run. And on top of that, the Steam page is very concerning in regards to the optimization. Honestly, after all of this mess, I really hope that Capcom just comes out and explains this in the near future, because people are starting to get really concerned that this game is going to be an unoptimized mess, quote unquote, which would be a heartbreaker for such a highly anticipated release. I don't think it's going to be unoptimized, but the devs should definitely just come right out and say it. We know the game is going to have an uncapped frame rate on PC, but what about consoles? Will it be a 30 FPS resolution mode with a 45 or 60 performance mode with a VRR option that has the game at 60 FPS? Now, one way that Capcom could easily clear up all of these matters is with a demo, which we actually have a bit of news to talk about regarding that. Capcom has made it a pretty common part of their business strategy over the last few years. Basically, every new Capcom game releases with a demo nowadays, and while nothing is 100% confirmed at the time I'm making this video, there's actually some evidence to suggest that we are going to be getting some sort of demo for Dragon's Dogma 2 in the near future. Recently, there was a backend update on the Steam database that was spotted by members of the Dragon's Dogma 2 community that revealed that a second app had been added to the game's Steam DB page. While the exact identity of the second app hasn't been 100% confirmed, it is stamped with a free on-demand label, which is usually attached to free demos released on Steam. The fact that this second free quote-unquote app was quietly added to the Dragon's Dogma Steam DB page definitely suggests that Capcom is cooking up a demo, and is very likely that it will be announced in the coming days, assuming that it hasn't been already announced by the time you're watching this video. So I'm hoping that this puts everyone's fears to rest about the actual optimization of the game, or maybe it will end up confirming that it runs like Dookie. Only time will tell, unfortunately, but it looks like we won't be waiting much longer for that confirmation one way or another. Now, the big question that Capcom is probably asking themselves right now is whether or not Dragon's Dogma 2 will hit the kind of mainstream success that they were hoping for with the first game. The original Dragon's Dogma launched in 2012 for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and it was later ported to the PC and 8th gen consoles, but despite its great reviews and large following, it never hit the same kind of numbers that a big budget Capcom game usually does, which is why it's taken over a decade for the sequel to be released. But it's also no secret that Dragon's Dogma 2 has been getting a lot more mainstream attention than the original did, and I'm sure that this was largely thanks to the release timing as well as Capcom fixing their reputation with gamers over the last 5 to 10 years. At the time of the first game launching, Capcom was seemingly going from controversy to controversy, but ever since the late 2010s, the publisher has turned into one of the most consistent and highly praised companies in the AAA gaming world, and it seems like every Capcom game that releases nowadays gets excellent reviews and amazing sales, and that simply wasn't the case back in 2012. So Dragon's Dogma 2 certainly has that going for it. Now, in addition to Capcom's better reputation this time around, Dragon's Dogma 2 is also launching at a time when large-scale fantasy RPGs are much more popular than they were back in the early 2010s, games like Skyrim aside. Since the release of the first Dragon's Dogma game, we've seen tons of huge fantasy RPGs like The Witcher, Baldur's Gate 3, Elden Ring, and so many more that helped propel that genre further into the mainstream. Dragon's Dogma 2 is coming out at a perfect time as well, especially since we're less than a year away from the runaway success of Baldur's Gate 3. So even though the first Dragon's Dogma didn't hit the same kind of success that Capcom games are usually shooting for, I firmly believe that the sequel could pull it off. It really seems like all odds are in their favor, and I'm definitely rooting for Itsuno. I think the Mad Lad pulled this game off. Now, there's no official word just yet on the actual size of this game, but the preload details have been confirmed, and according to Capcom, you'll be able to install the game 2 days prior to launch. Obviously, that depends on the platform, and if I had to guess, I would say that Dragon's Dogma 2 will be somewhere around the 70 plus gigabyte range, again depending on the platform. The original game is roughly 20 gigs on the PC, and since the sequel is going to be bigger in basically every regard, as well as the fact that gameplay games are just bigger nowadays. I think 70 plus is a good estimation. So if you have the game pre-purchased or you're planning on doing that, just know that you'll be able to install it around 48 hours before the launch on March 20th. That's confirmed at least for PS5 and I'm sure Xbox, but we're not sure about PC. But what do you guys think about Dragon's Dogma 2? Are you excited about this new upcoming fantasy RPG? Do you think the game will pull it off? Or do you plan on waiting until the potential demo drops to play it and then decide? Let me know what your thoughts are on this game down in the comment section. Subscribe with your notifications turned on so you're not missing out on any future gaming news and updates. I appreciate all of your support on the channel. As of lately, we hit 150,000 subscribers. And until next time, this has been Wes, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.